Fairly Odd Parents, for a majority of its run, is a certified hood classic. Miserable average kid gets fairy godparents that'll grant his every wish to help him get through childhood in the most exciting way possible. But there's also a list of rules to follow, and if he's ever caught with them, they'll be taken away forever. For other kids, their favorite Nick show was usually SpongeBob, but for me, it was always FOP. It had a simple but endlessly creative concept, interesting settings, world building and magical creatures, and a charm that couldn't be matched thanks to its stellar cast of multi-dimensional personalities, both on the heroes and especially the villain sides. And that cast got them through 5 great seasons, 4 specials, and 3 crossover events before the series was ultimately cancelled. And then brought back through the new inclusion of the 2 main fairies, Cosmo and Wanda's baby Poof, who boosted the show's declining ratings and led it down the path to getting another 5 seasons of gradually worse quality, if I'm being honest. Not to say there weren't a few good things to come from it. The Wishology trilogy is great, Meet the Odd Parents is a good episode, but they just kept adding new characters to a really gimmicky level. The fairies have evil opposites to them called anti-fairies, so after Poof, an evil anti-fairy version of him called Foop is introduced, who becomes a major recurring villain throughout the rest of the series. I guess that's not too gimmicky, it at least fits with the lore, but how about Sparky, the radical talking fairy dog, and Chloe, the second godchild, and Anti-Sparky, the anti-fairy version of Sparky. Yeah, people got tired of new characters real quick, seeing them for the obvious attempt to boost ratings they were, that, unlike Poof, were no longer special since they kept happening season after season after half season, and the less we talk about when the show went to Flash to save money, the better. In the end, Fairly Odd Parents ran the course of a long-running TV show that was milk dry until the network couldn't get any more money out of it, but those first 5 seasons still stand out as being super high quality, and nothing can tarnish the show's legacy any more than the sad fashion it went out in. So anyway, remember the live-action Fairly Odd Parents film starring well-known, non-controversial, lovable actor Drake Bell? Yeah, they existed, and they kinda missed the entire point of Fairly Odd Parents, which was that once the child got old enough, they wouldn't need fairies anymore since they could forge their own paths in life and find happiness in the world of adulthood. But no, not Timmy Turner, nah. He gets to keep his godparents forever because blah blah loophole, blah blah first movie had good ratings, blah blah sequels. Look, even disregarding who plays the title character, which is kind of really hard to ignore, these films were never all that good. They have a certain charm to them in their awfulness, but much like the show, as they kept dragging on, the quality got worse and worse until reaching A Fairly Odd Summer. A really cheap, hilariously dated product with terrible visual effects, its only shining light was the actor playing Timmy's teacher, Mr. Crocker, who weirdly gave it his all in each of the films. But hey, since those movies came to an end and the show has been off the air for like half a decade now, there isn't much else that could be done to tarnish the franchise. The original creator and well-known god amongst men, Butch Hartman, even left the studio in a dramatic fashion. So what else could they possibly do to fuck this up besides doing the only thing that pretty much no one was asking for? A live-action animation hybrid sitcom made for Paramount Plus. Yay! Man, I sure do wonder how well this will turn out. I mean, it's what everyone was asking for. If they didn't release this show like they did, I'm sure the street riots would have been massive. Anarchy would have ruled the streets if we didn't get Fairly Odd Parents, Fairly Odder. Creative title, by the way. I sure hope nothing potentially terrible comes from this, but what are the chances of that? This is going to be great. I can feel it. Please kill me. But there's something else magical that I've also got to tell you about, and that's the sponsor for this video, Keeps, a subscription service aimed at helping men keep their hair. For anyone who doesn't know me or what I look like, I've got some long locks I've cultivated that I'd hate to lose, but if looking at my family is any indicator, that could just happen, and it's not just me at risk either. A lot of guys are less lucky than me and have already started feeling the effects of male baldness, which 2 out of 3 will have to deal with by age 35. So if you've noticed some missing patches or early signs, Keeps is there with clinically proven, research-backed treatments to keep any more strands from falling out and potentially getting some back. Got any troubles with the program? There's a free, always ready 24-hour hotline that'll get you connected with professionals to help you sort it out. What's more, all their treatment plans are doctor recommended and delivered straight to your door at half the price of most pharmacies, so you're already saving money by making the choice. And if that isn't enough to get you, by going to keeps.com/juststop or my link in the description, you'll get 50% off your first order. That's keeps.com/JUSTSTOP. Thanks to Keeps for sponsoring, and on with the video. Going back to what I said about the first 5 seasons of FOP, a major factor that made them as good as they were was the memorable cast to populate the world. So many people lived around Timmy Turner to not only elevate him as a character, but be valid, likable additions in their own right. His idiotic, well-meaning parents, his evil babysitter Vicky, his aforementioned fairy-obsessed teacher Mr. Crocker, his friends AJ and Chester, his bully Francis, and I could go on, but you get the point. And each one of them were fleshed out just as much as Timmy. Sure, he was the main lead, but that didn't mean every story had to focus solely on his problems. Hell, one of the fan-favorite episodes is about the tragic life that led Mr. Crocker to being the way he was, making such an originally goofy villain more compelling and even somewhat sympathetic. Not to undermine the main trio though, since their relationship is still incredibly important. As a matter of fact, Cosmo, Wanda, and Timmy, as the protagonists, all have phenomenal chemistry and bounce off each other in an endearing way. As a husband and wife team, Cosmo and Wanda are a good representation of opposites attract, one being more fun-loving and dumb, the other in charge and responsible, but nonetheless, supportive of one another and their godchild all the same, who, being a normal kid that no one understands, works as both a flawed kid that needs to learn a lesson and a lovable scamp with a massive imagination, perfect for delivering the show's themes and having Cosmo and Wanda to guide him all along the way. Timmy's also got a good heart, making him want to help the people he cares about if possible, which contributes to the side character focus episodes mentioned. So they have a sort of symbiotic relationship that's wholly of the show's creation. Everything was really well crafted to work out like it did, and the new show completely throws that dynamic out the window. I can tell I'm gonna love this already, it's gonna be great. The explanation given is that Timmy's grown up and is going off to Princeton, which is bullshit writer speak for saying they needed to get him out of the main character spot for the sake of new ones, but I don't really get why they wanted to change it up in the first place. Not to repeat myself, but the original cast was perfectly suited for telling the type of stories Fairly OddParents wanted to tell, and though I can understand not wanting to tread the same ground of 10-year-old Timmy making wishes, that didn't mean he had to be completely replaced. Why not have the series be about his teenage years? That would provide a new perspective, develop him as a character, shake up the status quo, and potentially give rise to the dramatic idea of if Timmy is getting too old for Cosmo and Wanda. God, that could do so much for tension and more mature themes, but whatever, Timmy's leaving for college, I get that. But if that's the case, why haven't Cosmo and Wanda left already? It's established that once a god kid is old enough to no longer need fairies, they'll go away and the godchild's memory will be wiped. But here we are. Cosmo and Wanda still there. In the dialogue leading up to Timmy saying he won't need them anymore, something that he's deciding instead of the fairies, Cosmo and Wanda are shocked to learn they won't be going to college with him when they're not supposed to. Cosmo and Wanda, in the original show, knew that they couldn't be with Timmy forever, and therefore they wanted to cherish the moments they had with him all the more before he's older. But here, he's clearly grown up and doesn't need them anymore, so they should be sad but also happy that it's time for him to let go, not angry and shocked. That's so out of character for them, considering their entire purpose for being Timmy's godparents in the first place, but whatever, forget it. Timmy's given up his fairies, that's what's important here. Virtually, the door has been opened to do pretty much whatever they want to do for a new character. A different setting, different characters, different dynamics, different problems. The potential here, much like the original show's premise, is only limited to the imagination of the people writing it. So who's the new lead? It's Timmy's cousin, that we've never heard of before, and her new stepbrother. And they both live in Dimsdale, the exact same city as Timmy, though there's little to indicate they're the same place. This doesn't work for a lot of reasons. First of all, Vivian, the cousin, isn't assigned to have fairy godparents. No, Timmy decides to give them to her because she's, quote, a mess. And he's able to do this in spite of the rules saying otherwise, since Jorgen von Strangle, the guy in charge of enforcing them, who is very strict, just, lets Timmy do it. Because. Specifically, Wanda says it's against the rules to give her and Cosmo away, but technically, there was another time in the show where Timmy lent his fairies to someone else. In the season 5 episode Birthday Wish, Timmy decides to give Cosmo and Wanda to his wannabe love interest and Vicky's sister, Tootie, for the duration of her birthday, but in order to do that, it was established that the person he gave the fairies to had to be at least twice as miserable as him. Really, there's never been a stated rule about whether or not he could permanently give his godparents away to someone else. That's something the show made up on the fly, but if we were to apply the original show's logic, making sure the kid receiving the fairies is miserable makes a lot of sense and should have been a caveat of Timmy being able to give them away. If a kid's in misery and they aren't assigned fairy godparents, it only makes sense that for a godchild to lend out their fairies, the person being lent them would have to be even more miserable, theoretically needing the godparents more. So wouldn't it be sensible that he could only permanently give them to someone who truly needs them, i.e. someone in more misery than he was in as a kid, i.e. not Vivian? Sure, she's a fish out of water in this town of wackier characters, but what makes her worthy of needing fairies? Does she get bullied? Not really. There's a popular girl that ignores her, but she ignores almost everyone, so that's whatever. The only person person she's targeted by for bullying is Vicky, who's a teacher now, but she's mean to everyone, so that's debatable as a quality that makes her especially worthy of having godparents. Is her home life a mess? No, her dad loves and pays attention to her, and she's got a good relationship with her stepbrother. I think the mom is supposed to be considered a bit meaner to her, but I honestly can't tell because she just acts zany like all the other Dimsdale characters. Is she depressed? No. Is she lonely? No, she has her best friend and stepbrother as support. Does she get bad grades? As far as we're shown, no. So why does she get fairy godparents over any other miserable kid when she clearly isn't miserable? You know what Timmy had to endure to get fairy godparents? He was bullied every day by students and teachers alike, he had failing grades, he was a social outcast, his parents were either never home or completely incompetent and unaware of his suffering, he constantly had to face an evil babysitter at home, and worst of all, he had buck teeth. He faced suffering at each and every point in his day that he couldn't escape. So Cosmo and Wanda pretty much saved him from a life of complete agony. How bad would Vivian's life be if Cosmo and Wanda were never brought into it? She'd be fine. She doesn't need them at all. And even if you want to disregard all that and be like, okay, so what if Vivian doesn't need fairy godparents? Maybe the writers just chose to make it about her because she's such an interesting character, they couldn't change anything about her to make her being given fairies fit in the guidelines for why any other kid would get them. To which I'd say that's a dumb excuse because Vivian is a completely bland and unremarkable character that probably would have been massively improved if she had to face some hardship. Viv's whole thing is that she's the normal girl in a town of weirdos, aka the Straightman. And don't get me wrong, that type of character is essential for most stories involving characters moving someplace foreign and getting involved with it. If there wasn't an Alice in Wonderland, we'd have no viewpoint from the average person. It'd just be non-stop weirdness with characters reacting like it's normal. But here's the thing, for the character to be fun or intriguing to watch, they can't only be the Straightman. There needs to be a set of characteristics beyond that makes their reaction unique from any other person. Are these changes going to make them fearful, overjoyed, overwhelmed, sad? For Viv, it's mild shyness cause she's a nerdy dork from the country who likes books. And if you think it ever goes beyond that, you have far more optimism than me. Unlike Timmy, who was constantly learning lessons and changing as a person over time, Viv pretty much never goes through anything that would make her think, maybe I was wrong to think that, or maybe I need to change that part of myself, because almost all of her wishes are either selfless or as basic as, I want to be popular. I want to make this person my friend. I want to get this boy to kiss me on the cheek. Wait, isn't that against the rules about not wishing people would fall in love with you? Just not gonna point that out? Okay. But you get what I'm saying. She's so boring to watch anytime she's on screen, and nothing endears me to the character in the slightest. She never has to overcome any form of adversity or challenge as a person because of a wish exemplifying a character flaw she has to face or something of that nature. Instead, having problems that come from being too considerate, which is infinitely less interesting compared to a person like Timmy, who, while also making selfless wishes, could be selfish or absent-minded in what he asked for, and that led to more interesting stories with greater variety and more outlandish results. He was a more flawed, not to mention better explored person than Viv ever was, so I don't understand why she was changed to be the new main lead over another version of Timmy. Though I guess there's an attempt at mirroring some of his characteristics in Roy the stepbrother, but he's a whole nother can of worms entirely. Something I've neglected to mention up to this point is that Vivian isn't the only person to have fairy godparents, but rather she shares them with her stepbrother Roy in a similar dynamic to Timmy and Chloe from the 10th season. And when you think about how incredibly successful the 10th season of FOP was, it's no wonder they decided to keep it for this. As opposed to Vivian's normal, selfless, considerate personality, Roy is the supposed wild card.
Guys, why aren't the brakes working?
Because I cut the brakes! Wild card, bitches! Yeah!
He's stupider, more impulsive, and likes to do things for the fun of it more than anything else, and I'm sure the actor that plays him is a nice kid and all, but the direction given to him is terrible, and he's by far the worst out of everyone here, both in terms of acting and character writing. His idea of being quirky and charismatic is to scream. Like a lot. Like to an unbearable extent in pretty much every scene he's in. He's also the writer's attempt at a hip character, spouting off all the cool modern lingo that the fellow kids are constantly saying all the time. And who could forget his wonderful catchphrases like, oh yeah, let's go, and I thought put him on a t-shirt, so likable. It's funny because it's not true and it's not what I actually mean. And Roy truly is a hard character to like in any capacity, being self-centered, egotistical, and downright harrowing to try enduring through a full episode. And though he might look much younger than Vivian, which I'm pretty sure he is, for whatever reason, he's also shoehorned into the same school as her. I guess so the two of them can have more interactions, and that means dealing with him at every point in the show in every given moment, almost never leaving Vivian alone. alone, and therefore almost never leaving us, the audience, alone. Welcome to hell! And what I hate about him far more than his personality is how blatantly obvious it is that he doesn't need fairies, even more than Vivian doesn't need fairies. Roy is popular in school, talented at sports, beloved by the entire city, loves his life, and gets called a local star in the opening theme song. He has literally no reason to need fairies in any way. He's constantly fucking happy. I don't recall a single moment where he was truly miserable, which I would have taken great joy in seeing since he's such a deliberate little shit. And every problem he faces in the series comes down to his own impotence and self-centered nature. With someone like Timmy, he made wishes that were self-indulgent, but a lot of the time he didn't think about how greedy they were. He wishes it would be Christmas every day, not understanding that if his parents had to buy toys all the time, they'd eventually run out of money, and the experience would gradually become less special. In another, he wishes people didn't sleep so that he could do late night things, but since people can't sleep, they become ugly and unproductive, meaning the world can't really function. You see, these are never done with the intent to harm others, but as Timmy experiences the wish, he understands the harm it can cause and tries to find a way to undo it. Roy isn't like that. Roy is much worse. Roy is far less forgivable. A perfect example of what I mean comes in the episode King Roydas, where he wishes for the Midas touch and accidentally turns his mom into a statue. Granted, at any time if he wanted, he could change her back by wishing for it, but instead, he decides that he needs to do it some other way in order to become a legend. Spoiler, he doesn't find a way to turn her back without magic and pretty much forgets about her by the end of the episode, so he has to be reminded to change her back and in the end, learns nothing about taking things too far for selfish reasons or anything like that, staying completely the same as a character and remaining just as vain and annoying as always. He knew what he was doing was selfish and could only benefit him, decided to continue with it until he was forced to stop, and by the conclusion, he still saw no problems with his actions. God, what a little shit. You'd think Cosmo and Wanda might try explaining why what he did was wrong, but they're barely in the show long enough to do so. In the simplest terms, Cosmo and Wanda used to be sort of main characters in their own right, always being beside Timmy to give him advice and help during the bad times, likewise getting several episodes dedicated to their issues, where Timmy looked out for them. But here, they barely show up for like 3 minutes an episode since they're animated, and the show really obviously cannot handle animation costs. Cosmo and Wanda can't help Roy and Vivian through the bad times since the show doesn't have a large enough budget to keep them on screen. So their main functions are to grant wishes, make a few pop culture references, and leave the step-siblings to stew in their own shit. And I really mean it when I say they make pop culture references all the time. Like half of their dialogue is nothing but Lin-Manuel Miranda, Wicked, Jason Momoa, Olivia Rodrigo, Cats. It gets really irritating when that's almost all they mention, leaving no room to show off their characters, pretty much boiling both of them down to being dumb and nothing else. The constant references don't stop at the fairies either. Everyone's constantly mentioning random shit in the public zeitgeist, and I started getting very confused very quickly when it's stuff like TikTok, Billie Eilish, the original show. I can at least understand those, even if they're cringeworthy, but how do you explain Ratatouille, Arby's, Two and a Half Men, Disney direct-to-video sequels, Friends, South Park?
Boo, you guys! I'm going home!
Okay, some of these make no sense being in a show meant for 10-year-olds. Yes, I'm sure they're all going to get that reference to the catchphrase of Eric Cartman from South Park. But Fairly OddParents had references too. Yeah, FOP did have references here and there that were meant for adults and older teens, but here's the thing. FOP could actually be tolerated and enjoyed by people over the age of 12, and there's no way that's the same for Fairly Odder. Do you think any adults are gonna sit down, look through Paramount Plus, and decide they want to watch this show that's nothing more than a cheap imitation of a much better series that's also on the same platform? And then, with that already stupid idea in mind, do you think they're gonna be so invested that they watch through to the 8th episode that this reference appears in and say, wow, I understood that reference. That was quite funny, if I do say so myself as a 25-plus-year-old man or woman. That's not gonna fucking happen, and you're delusional if you think it is. Man, that was a weird tangent, but anyway, going back to the fairies barely leaving an impact, that's the same for most of the side characters of Dimsdale, who are way inferior to their animated counterparts. The parents of Roy and Vivian are way less funny than Timmy's, though I will admit they were the only characters to make me laugh. And that's because they had good Broadway actors playing them, which inadvertently makes me sad that they're wasting their talent on something like this. The mayor is a baby now, as opposed to a short guy with a goat, cause I guess he wasn't random enough, and besides being random, there's no real reason given for why a baby is the mayor, even in a throwaway joke. Some stone-faced reporter woman replaces Chet You Betcha as a TV anchor, and I loved Chet You Betcha, so by extension, I hate this character that replaced him. Don't remember her name, but I sure do hate that she isn't Chet You Betcha. A generic popular girl is in like 2 episodes, she's a wannabe Trixie without any of the depth. There's a kid named Jake Bucksaplenty who shares a last name with the rich kid Remy Bucksaplenty, but we're never told if they're related or if it's a coincidence or what, but there's one thing I can tell you it is. Lazy. Man, do they have any of the original characters besides Cosmo and Wanda?
I'm Miss Vicky.
Could I, like, retract what I just said? Cause this isn't what I wanted. Why would you think this is what anyone wanted? Okay, so Vicky is a teacher now. Actually, I don't hate that decision. It's set like 8 years after the original show, so she'd be aged up, and what's the best place to boss around and torture the most kids? School. There's a line of logic that I can get behind on that front. What I can't say the same for is Vicky filling in the role that Mr. Crocker had of being the fairy-obsessed lunatic, and also having a massive crush on him? That's kind of weird, not gonna lie. At most, she's, what, 24? And Mr. Crocker was 53 in the original cartoon, so now he'd be 61 years old. That's a really creepy age difference, and the original Vicky would never be like that. In the first place, she'd never believe in fairies, she'd be too cynical to think it was real, and secondly, she had pretty normal preferences as a teenager when it came to people she was attracted to. And even if she didn't, I still don't think she'd go for a character intentionally designed to be as ugly as possible.
Figure! Oh my gosh, it's worse than I thought! He's gorgeous!
And hold on, something else is missing. I got it. All the magical characters besides Cosmo, Wanda, and occasionally Jorgen are completely absent from the series, as are their respective worlds and lore. Where are all the villains besides Vicky, like the Pixies and the Anti-Fairies, and Norm the Genie, and all the weird comic book villains? Where's the Tooth Fairy, the April Fool's Day Fairy, Cupid, Wandissimo? Hell, I never thought I'd be saying this, but where's Poof? What happened to their baby? Why is he gone? What happened to him? Is he dead? I'm gonna assume he's dead. But no, I know the real answer for why none of them are here. As much as I'd like to believe they somehow all canonically died in a fiery car crash, the show simply doesn't have the money to bring them to life. Which brings me to another massive reason for why the series doesn't work starting from its inception. Fairly OddParents, as a concept, inherently works best in the world of animation. Really, the idea applies to anything having to do with magic, but yeah, though there were rules, the amount of wishes Timmy could make were still nearly infinite. And with that came nearly infinite set pieces like Fairy World, Yuccopotamia, the inside of famous literature, the inside of different TV shows, and I could go on and on. No idea for wishes or settings were off the table since the world of animation allowed them to do anything they wanted, whether big or small. And so most of what they did in Fairly OddParents could never be done, or at least matched in scope, in live action without a massive budget. Though the live action Aladdin reboot points to that not being enough either. Point is, a sitcom Fairly OddParents is a terrible idea, and this show seems to have lower funding than most Nick sitcoms to begin with, so the corner cutting is prominent as hell. In fact, how about we go through and document just a couple of the real egregious, hilarious, cheap cuts Fairly Odder has made in its 13-episode run. Like in season 10 of the original show, they redid the theme song and made it much worse because you can't really improve on the original theme song when it's so good. But listening to the lyrics also shows that this version was written with being cost-effective in mind. The iconic Really Mod, Peapod, Buff Bod, Hot Bod, Obtuse, Rubber Goose, Green Moose, Bottle of Juice, Giant Snake, Birthday Cake, Large Fries, Chocolate Shake line is now new shirt, blue skirt, insert dessert, swimwear, leisure chair, chocolate square, time to share, gold throne, clear phone, dino bone, silly clone. You see what I'm talking about? Did the songwriters make these lyrics while looking at the fucking supply closet and writing whatever they had in stock?
Brick, are you just looking at things in the office and saying that you love them?
I love lamp.
This is pathetic! Much like the opening itself, which has the kind of green screening I could mimic without trying. Actually, hold on a second.
Whoa, I'm totally flying and don't look like an asshole who bought a $20 green screen on Amazon at all. Whoa.
Moving on, there appear to be around 7 main sets in total. There's Vivian's room, the living room, the cafeteria, the classroom, the dance studio, a few other single room sets I'm gonna lump together because they're most likely the same room done over, and the green screen. That might sound like a good amount, but if you think about series like iCarly, Victorious, or Big Time Rush, they've got way more than 6 sets and a green screen to move around in. And due to those limitations, it becomes hilariously clear how little the crew has to work with. In the first episode, Roy is going to play in a big game, so at the end he's shown making baskets on a green screen, and his posse cheers him on from a single spot they're crammed into to represent a gym. Usually in these kinds of moments, you'd want there to be crowd shots of people cheering and him zipping around the opponents or whatever, but extras and additional sets cost money, so this is all we're getting, and it's marvelous. Speaking of things that cost money, practical effects. But how are they gonna get around this one, Scoob? They're supposed to show a sassy talking wolf going off on the townsfolk, so how can they save costs? Just don't show it. Leave him in the background. Don't even give him a silhouette. You know he's there because he's got a voice, and that's all it takes.
And if your outfit could talk, it would say, "I've given up."
This is an impressive fight, though.
I'm glad I'm facing towards it.
Hey, don't look now, but we gotta do a kaiju-style battle, and there's no money to make it look good. I know, throw in a line right before saying old monster movies are all cheap, and that it's meant to be a loving homage like we could do better when we definitely cannot. Nailed it. And what about that scene where Roy's turned into a puppet? The puppeteer quit after our check bounced. I've got it. Get the best face painter you know to make him look mildly wooden at best. And who could forget the props? In all of Nate Buxaplenny's appearances, he's got plenty of fake money, but I don't mean that in the same way most shows or movies have realistic prop cash. He goes one step beyond and has what looks like an enlarged form of Monopoly money. Then there's all the drawn images that are either directly lifted from the original show or complete recolors like with Nate, who's depicted as a black-haired Remy Buxaplenny despite looking virtually nothing like him. And Roy's got original posters too. And not only do they not look like him, but I'm pretty certain it wasn't done by a professional artist at all. Seriously, who drew this? Did they take it from a DeviantArt or something? It's fucking magnificent! That's what it is! 10 out of 10. 10 more seasons, more like! And check out some of these costumes. The best clothes the Party City bargain bin could offer. Can you believe all this pure quality? And I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. The animation! Okay, for real, I'm gonna stop with the sarcasm. My facial muscles can't take this level of forced pep any longer. But yeah, what can I say? This has gotta be some of the worst looking animation I've ever witnessed come out of a professional production. Not to mention lazy, cheap, and completely amateurish. I'm not exaggerating when I say it looks like the sitcom staff, who'd never worked on an animated project before, were asked to do the animation by themselves in as short a time as possible, and this is what they put together. It's a little difficult to tell where I should start, since when you're dissecting a 5-car pileup, there's not exactly a good place to dive in, but here goes. I've never seen such a clear misusage of rigged character animation before. If you don't know what that is, to give an oversimplification, it's when a character is constructed like a puppet with joints and such for the purpose of animators more seamlessly being able to move them around. And when done correctly, I think it can look better than traditional animation, such as with Mao Mao Heroes of Pure Heart, which has some really fluid, impressive action scenes. However, much like Flash, another program clearly misused here, these shouldn't be looked at as shortcuts, but rather tools to make existing products better, and Fairly Odder very much uses both for the former. There's no attempt to make anything look natural or weighty, instead going for the choppiest, most robotic, low frame rate, badly lip-synced, computer-generated, factory-produced bullshit you could possibly make, showing us that the animation crew either didn't give a shit, had no budget, or they were hopelessly incompetent. It's one of those three, and there is no in-between. You can't fully get a grasp for how terrible everything looks until you get to the few fully animated scenes, though. As far as I can tell, there are 3, and each has an endless string of problems. Inconsistent lighting, bad perspective, boring backgrounds that also have bad perspective, janky movement, a few occasions where the models feel like they're just about to fall apart. You know what, just compare it with the actual show. That's all you need to do to tell how dogshit it is by any conceivable standard. And don't get me started on the integration, because I don't have any words to describe it with other than awful. I really can't say anything more than just look at it. You know, there's something wrong that you can't place your finger on, and that's the reaction you should have. Actually, that's a great slogan for the show as a whole. By the time you've finished, you get the feeling that you've done something incredibly wrong, but you can't quite understand why, since the experience was also so forgettable that you can't remember most of the details. You definitely did something for the last 4 hours, but what exactly it was you'll never know because it couldn't leave an impact. That's all that Fairly Odder is. Boring, formulaic, cheap, unfunny, and a complete disgrace to the property it's trying to cash in on. I'm sure the cast tried their best to make the material work, and the original voice of Crocker did an okay job at replicating him in real life. Why is it that he's weirdly the only aspect that these sorts of things get right? But nothing could save this mess from being anything other than a wannabe. So I say fuck watching this and recommend going back to the original series. You'll have a much better time. And I do plead that you don't watch Fairly Odder under any circumstances unless it's pirating. I might have made it sound like a so bad it's good kind of property, but no, most of it is pure tedium. Don't give them a reason to make a second season. I won't forgive any of you! Hope you enjoyed my latest bout of schizophrenic ranting. There's another big project on the way that I hope you all enjoy, but until then, I'll see you later. Thanks again for watching. Peace.